You know, of all the times of year to share some small, personal things about myself, I think February makes sense. It's Black History Month, a time where many people are very much able to show off their talents and be highlighted for their creativity and their culture. This is all done while being proud of who they are, myself included. One part of this, though, is the importance of not only the present and the future, but of the past as well. Our ancestors have a rich wealth of things that they've passed down from one generation to another. Whether it's family names, handmade items that are now heirlooms, or oration about their homeland or the horrors of their new lives here, each family has something they hold dear from these past lives. For me though, one thing that's obvious is this. I'm an artsy guy. I draw, paint, sculpt, and study what inspires me. I also love to cook. And while I was looking into what I could share with an audience, a thought occurred to me. I was in the mood for something to eat. So why not share something I grew up eating? Something many black families like mine grew up eating and have a history of cultivating. I've never actually cooked this before, so we're learning together on this one. Today, we're going to be talking about a staple for many black families in the South of the United States. The best part is you could potentially add this to your garden for the year and have dinner on the table in a few seasons. So, let's talk about the humble collard plant, or collard greens. When I was a child, I remember driving with my grandmother here and there a lot. One thing that was often a theme was stopping to talk to a farmer on the side of the road. Depending on what he might have from his fields, we'd grab whatever they'd have and bring them home to eat in some capacity. In the South, it could be watermelons fresh off the vine, oranges picked fresh from trees, or even fresh peas and beans from whatever plant they were picked from. But one thing always stood out in my memory. On occasion, a farmer might have his truck bed loaded full of dark, leafy vegetables. This, more often than not, would be either collard plants or mustard plants. The former is who we're talking about today, but the same thing still applies. My grandmother would inspect a bit, looking at the plants and their leaves, before paying the man and bringing a whole bunch of these plants home to cook. This was multiple times a year, and for many families it was always a staple due to the affordability and the sheer amount of food you can get for such a low price. But what are collard greens? Brassica oleracea is a general scientific name for the collard plant and its many cousins, all of which allegedly hail from wild plants across Eastern Europe. You've eaten its family members before, though you've probably never heard their scientific names, just their government ones. You've probably had things like broccoli, cabbage, kale, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. If so, you've eaten a variant of Brassica oleracea plant and may have never known it. The plants are incredibly hardy and are dense in nutrients, but hang on, all these plants look so different. How are they related? Well, I'm no horticulturist, but the basic idea seems to be breeding choices. Let's say, for instance, you find a wild plant with big leafy greens that are edible. As you domesticate this plant, you notice the flowers are edible as well. You like the flowers more than the leaves, so you call any of the plants that aren't focusing on flower making. Any you leave with big flowers spread their lineage, and eventually you get a variation of your original plant. It's the same thing here. You want bigger flowers or florets on your plant, you eventually get broccoli. Want the leaves to go into small clusters? You've got Brussels sprouts. And you want those buds bigger? You get cabbage. This is a real rudimentary view, but you can see where this is going. Now we have a bunch of these greens and off-green sons of bitches all over the place, and given that they're hardy in nature, you won't see a decline in the plants anytime soon. Alright, I get all that, you might be saying. So what's so important about brassica plants, and specifically collard greens? Collard greens are a loose-leafed plant that are found in variations all over the world. They can survive harsh climates and are nutrient-dense thanks to their dark, big green leaves. For our purposes though, going back to mine and many of the ancestors of the diaspora, collard greens are a cultivated plant in Africa. This is important because as Africans were traded and removed from their homes, they took their traditions with them. When they arrived to the Americas, they were treated inhumanely, beaten and battered. Our culture was threatened severely, but in a way, they found some things don't change. African slaves would tend to massive plantations and have to deal with all manner of plants and cultivars. Collards would have been a plant they would cultivate and would happen to know quite well. Being desperate to feed themselves, they'd have to take whatever scraps they could and make themselves dinner. Things like frying chicken, stewing and cooking literally any and every part of the pig, or taking scraps that their oppressors didn't want were par for the course. One meal they could stretch would be trimming and stewing down the thick fibrous stalks and leaves of the bitter collard plant, adding bits of pork or scraps of poultry to add even more flavor and nutrients to whatever meals they could scrap together. It's these meals that nourished the body and gave my people the strength to continue. Those meals kept us alive and were passed along the generational tide. One cook taught the next, and the next taught the one after. Eventually, all of that comes down to the modern day, where we see these meals are a comfort food for many and can still be the difference between an empty stomach and a bountiful dinner. Collard greens are a part of African American history, and history in general. Without them, even more of us wouldn't be able to tell these stories or share with the world our heritage and how good it tastes. And so, to honor my ancestors and my family's traditions, I'm going to make collard greens from scratch for the first time and share those methods with you. Hopefully, you will always have a full plate and full heart as we partake in this endeavor. Collard greens are pretty easy to make actually, but we need a few things in order to ensure they're as flavorful as possible. We'll need the greens themselves, a stock to cook it all in, and a few other minor ingredients. One thing I will stress to you before we begin, if this is your first time, like it is mine, you will need to start this well before dinner time. If dinner is for 7 p.m., start at 12 p.m. Or even better, start the night before. This is labor intensive. I started this at 5 p.m. and didn't eat until 10 p.m. So be sure you're not like me and don't have a puffed up sense of confidence. The greens will break you. Since I've got that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin. First things first, before we tend to our greens, we'll need a stock or a broth. You could use a store-bought stock, but this is the NoodleDog channel. I didn't teach you to be weak. I'll be making a simple but flavorful stock using a little ingredient you may have in a store near you. This is a smoked turkey's wing. Some families use ham hocks or smoked turkey's necks, but this is a fine addition to our greens, but either of these will work. It's salted, smoked, and fully cooked, but it is tough. To remedy this, we'll need to simmer this in water. We'll start by placing this turkey wing in a pot and filling the pot until the wing is just submerged. Place the pot on the stove and bring it to a boil before lowering the heat to a simmer and covering the wing for an hour and a half. While the wing is boiling, let me introduce you to the star of our show, collard greens. Named for the broad, dark leaves that almost resemble a collar of a shirt, these are going to be the bulk of our dinner. I was able to get these from a store, but you can likely find these at the farmer's market if you look hard enough. For our purposes, we'll need 5 large, healthy bunches of greens to give us a big old pot. Whether you get them from a store or a farmer, you'll need to inspect these greens. Be sure to preen them of any snails, worms, or detritus that may have been feasting on our bounty, and remove any sickly or off-looking greens. Once this is achieved, we'll move to the washing phase. My mother, called NoodleDog by no one but me on this channel, gave me instructions so we could succeed together. In order to make sure these greens are edible, they will need to be washed no less than 5 times. To do this, we'll place the leaves in the sink, filling said sink with water and sprinkling a hefty amount of salt onto the greens. We'll then play TikTok chiropractor and begin massaging the greens, being sure to scrub gently but diligently. You'll notice this is a gritty and dirty plant. After the first rinse, you'll see flecks and bits in the wash water. This is where a lot of greens fail. Improper washing will lead to a gritty final product. When you finish the wash, remove the greens and drain the water. With the water drained, we'll feel the bottom of the sink. This will be an indicator for how dirty the greens are. After each wash, less and less grit will be felt, and after at least 5 good washes, the sink bottom will feel nice and grit-free. I wash these greens 6 times for good luck, before draining them and preparing myself for the next and possibly most arduous step. Before this though, we'll go ahead and remove our turkey wing from its bath, setting the wing into a bowl to cool, and saving the water for later. Now comes what I think is the most painful part of making greens like this. In order to have all of these fit into your vessel of choice, we'll need to chiffonade these greens. All you'll need to do is grab a few leaves at a time and roll them into as tight a cylinder as possible before thinly slicing the leaves into ribbons. Try to get as many slices on this roll of leaves as you can, and you should be left with the neat shreds that you could set aside in a vessel while we repeat the process. If you're having trouble, stack larger leaves first and get progressively smaller so the rolling is far easier. Rinse and repeat until all the leaves are nice and thinly sliced. Somewhere along the latter part of the chiffonade process, I'm going to prepare a secondary ingredient to add to our greens. If you've seen my red beans and rice video, which you 100% should, you'll recognize this ingredient. I've got a pack of pickled pork that will add to this cooking process. If you can't find this, cubed ham or sausage also works, but for this, pickled pork is extremely salty. We're going to need to boil it first. NoodleDog was again very specific about how to cook this. Just fill a pot with water and put the pork in. You'll then bring this pot to a boil and then simmer the pork for exactly 20 minutes. Just to make sure I spite the mother dog like all children do, I will cook the pork for 22 minutes exactly, to prove nothing will actually happen if I disobey my mother. See? Nothing bad happened. We'll put this pork aside to let it cool while we do one last bit of prep work. We'll just need to dice one very large white onion and 6 to 8 cloves of garlic. I'm not using fresh garlic, so feel free to just use minced garlic from a jar. It won't matter too much. With all of this done, let's finally begin the cooking process. To one large pot, turn the heat to medium and add a tablespoon of olive oil. Once the oil is shimmering, we'll add our onion and a large pinch of chili flakes. I'm using Korean chili flakes since they don't have usual red pepper, so go hog wild with your choice here. Just don't add an obscene amount unless you want it really spicy. After the onion begins to turn translucent, introduce the garlic to the pot and cook until fragrant, about a minute or so. When your garlic is smelling nice and delicious, we'll add our turkey stock to the pot to deglaze the bottom. Use a spoon to scrape the bottom of the pot, and with this, we can finally add our greens. In batches, add a few large handfuls of your sliced greens into the pot. While it looks like an awful lot of bulk, like spinach and other leafy greens, the greens will lose a lot of water and begin to wilt pretty quickly. When they've wilted and allow for more room, add another few handfuls, rinse and repeat, and eventually the greens will have fully fit into the pot and begin to cook down. With this done, let's turn to our meat and prep them for the pot. With the turkey wing, strip the meat off the bones of the bird, reducing them to meaty bits and strips. The skin is an optional addition. I added a few pieces to add more flavor, but it's not required. The pickled pork is simple too. Just chop the pork into 1-inch cubes before adding both it and the turkey to the stewing pot. With all of this work done, the easiest part of the experience is upon us. We'll have to cook the collard greens until they're your desired tenderness. To do this, we'll just add 2 capfuls of apple cider vinegar for a vinegary bite that will mellow out as this all cooks. Let the liquid come to a boil and then set the heat to a simmer and put a lid on a pot before letting this cook for at least 45 minutes before coming back to examine the vegetables. What we're looking for is for the leaves to be soft enough to be chewed without it being fibrous or leafy. They should be soft and give easily when chewed. When they've gotten to your preferred texture, we'll begin the seasoning process. Take a spoon and taste the braising liquid. Add what you feel is missing. For myself, I started with a large pinch of salt, adding garlic and onion powder as well. Black pepper was next, and I like my greens pretty peppery, so I added a half a teaspoon until I was satisfied. If you want an extra kick to your braising liquid, you can add a stock cube or bouillon paste into the liquid until the flavor is deep and rich. For me, I'm looking for a rich, savory, poultry flavor in the stock with a pleasantly garlic-forward taste. Add a pinch of salt here and there to balance things out until you've gotten your preferred taste, and let the greens braise until you're ready to serve. Since I'm hungry, why not cook up some protein? I'm going to quickly fry some pork loin chops. I've tenderized these chops by gently slapping my knife blade across the surface in various orientations. I'll then season them with salt, pepper, onion and garlic powder, chili flakes, and a touch of MSG. Massage the meat and let it sit for a minimum of 30 minutes. When it's time to cook, I'll add an egg to the bag I've chosen for the pork and massage said pork before laying it out on a tray and adding flour and the same seasonings I used on my pork, without doing this.
Got him! Got him!
Now comes what you already know. Dredge the egg-washed pork into the flour, and after patting off the excess, cook the pork in hot oil around 325 Fahrenheit to 162 degrees Celsius. Cook the pork until it's golden brown and the internal temperature reads 145 degrees or 63 degrees Celsius. With everything done, we can now hit the plate with our spread. I like to eat my greens with white rice. After warming some rice I had made prior, I piled my plate high with a large helping of greens, using a slotted spoon to drain any excess liquid. I'll also cut up and serve my pork chop and set it onto my plate before finally admiring my work. In tasting, this is exactly how I remember the collard greens I used to eat as a kid. A bit smoky, very much garlicky, meaty, and wonderfully savory. These are collard greens to be proud of. The pork chop is alright. I mean, did you see what happened to it? It tasted like straight garlic. But the whole meal is still nostalgic, and I believe I did my ancestors proud, aside from the pork. It's always a good feeling to get in touch with your roots and find a bit of yourself in the food you eat and the culture represents. All it's missing now is some cornbread, but we'll talk about that in due time. This whole meal is really special to me. Sharing a bit of myself and a bit of my culture with not only those who may not know or those who may need to push in the right direction is really important. This isn't the best meal I've ever made, but what it is a blast from the past I was able to make for myself and honor those who came before me. NoodleDog even got to try my attempt. She doesn't even like collard greens, but she was very pleased with the result. So, in a way, I've done what I set out to do, and I hope I've been able to pass this along to you as well. And that way, the culture won't die. Hopefully, it can be honored and bring you and others a full belly in the toughest of times. Food is culture, and it brings us together. Above all things, we gotta eat. It's our job to make sure it tastes good. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. If you liked this video, leave a comment down below and like the video. If you know someone else who might like the recipe, share it with them or let me know if you tried this recipe for yourself. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos. The kitchen is always open, and I'll serve you up some bangers soon enough. With that, eat well. I'll see you dogs later.